According to the website enslaverynow.org, which was last updated in December 2017, an estimated 20.9 million people are victims of forced labor. Forced labor is most like historic American slavery, coerced, often physically and without pay. Forced labor is a subject I have become very familiar with. I have done a lot of research on it, and I have even did an English paper last year on sex trafficking, which is one of the many forms of forced labor. This is something I believe everyone should be concerned with because it's something that has the potential to affect any one of us, and it's something that we could be contributing to without even knowing it. I think we should be able to be doing more about it, and we should be able to move beyond it. Slavery is inhumane and barbaric. In the next few minutes, I will be discussing a few of the different types of forced labor, some of the locations in which these crimes occur, and how it affects you or how you may even be contributing to it. First, let's discuss a few of the different types of forced labor. One type is called bonded labor. Bonded labor or debt bondage is when a person goes to work for someone in order to repay a debt that typically there's no coming back from. Because once they actually start working for the employer will add on fees for shelter or food or water, stuff that is needed in order for them to be working. And these are just added on to the original debts. Some of these debts are incurred by the workers themselves, but some are passed down from generation to generation. Another type of forced labor comes in the form of child laborers. According to the International Labor Organization, child labor is the enslavement of anyone under the age of 18. Not only are children the main targets for sex traffickers, but they are also specifically used in production processes for their small stature and agility. These traits are usually what lead to the employment of children. Finally, sex trafficking is considered a form of forced labor. In an article Marley Weiss wrote for the ABA Journal of Labor and Employment Law titled Human Trafficking and Forced Labor, a primer, she stated that in the United States and other developed countries, labor trafficking and forced labor often involve workers who incur debt in their home countries to gain entry into developed countries as legal guest workers. Worldwide, it is estimated that there are 4.5 million victims of sex trafficking. Typically, people who live in poverty and lack rights and access to things such as education are more vulnerable to sex trafficking. These victims are offered false employment opportunities in big cities and then abused, threatened, and sold in the sex industry. Now that I've gone over a few of the different types of forced labor, let me tell you some of the locations in which these crimes occur. Asia is likely the country with the highest percentage of victims of forced labor. The International Labor Organization has reported an estimated 11 million people in Asia and the Pacific are modern slaves. Most of the people forced into slavery in Asia perform jobs in the domestic, agriculture, construction, manufacturing, and entertainment industries. Africa also has a lot of people forced into modern-day slavery, with 9.2 million people being estimated in forced labor. They also have several different forms of forced labor present, including domestic servitude, debt bondage, military slavery, and even a local slave trade. Even North and South America has slavery and forced labor, with 1.95 million people in the Americas being in some form of forced labor. Many victims of forced labor in the Americas have been trafficked here from other countries, but the majority come from India, China, Mexico, and Vietnam. The areas that forced labor is most prevalent here are sex services, domestic servitude, agriculture, sweatshops, and factory work. With as many countries and service industries that are inundated by forced labor, and as hugely profitable as it is hard to come by people that are not affected by it or actually unknowingly contributing to it. In January 18th, 2014 article on MontgomeryNews.com, Nita Bells, the author of a book titled In Our Backyard, an advocate and someone who has worked with victims of domestic violence, stated that trafficking is the second largest and fastest growing crime industry in the world, and its success is largely dependent on a lack of awareness by the community. And by accepting trafficking or just turning our heads, what we effectively do is put money in the pockets of the traffickers. So simply by doing nothing, you're contributing to the crime of trafficking. Bells also said that, financially speaking, human trafficking is a burden on the economy. Because it is a problem that operates so effectively under the radar, it is difficult to pinpoint exactly how much trafficking costs America. However, a 2011 cost-benefit study conducted by the University of Minnesota's Urban Research and Outreach Engagement Center found that it cost Minnesota's government more to do nothing about trafficking than to institute prevention programs. And according to 50forfreedom.org, because of forced labor, many legitimate companies are forced to compete with unscrupulous companies and are put under pressure to lower wages and cut benefits, causing many employees to be struggling more financially or out of a job altogether. Meanwhile, the governments lose on tax revenues while facing legal costs to prosecute forced labor cases. This is money that could be used to on public services like education, healthcare, and public transportation. If nothing else, you may be contributing simply by making everyday purchases. Your clothing and jewelry may be the product of men, women, and children forced into slavery in a garment factory in Asia. They are subjected to such cruelty as withholding of passports, no pay, and long working hours to meet quotas, along with physical and sexual abuse. Even things like chocolates may be tainted by forced labor. An estimated 300,000 children in Africa work on the plantations that produce cocoa worldwide. I think this excerpt from the book Modern Slavery, A Global Perspective explains it perfectly. Enslavement offers immense profits at minimal risk through the exploitation of vulnerable subclasses whose brutalization is tacitly accepted by the current global economic order. The types, locations, and ways that forced labor either directly or indirectly affects us are just a few of the important aspects to talk about when considering forced labor. I want to thank everyone who took time out of their day to listen to me speak on a subject that is far from enjoyable, but something that needs to be talked about.